just as progressive rock reached its peak, music got a sudden wake-up call.
Everything had arrived at the stage where it all needed a huge, great kick, and of course punk arrived kind of in the nick of time.
Gritty guitars and the 3-minute pop song were back. With Attitude, the punk revolution released a torrent of new talent. It was all about making a statement. Their sound had to be loud, and for most, the established Marshall was the amp of choice.
I was a big punk fan. Johnny Ramone had a wall of Marshalls, the JMP ones and the plexiglass ones. And you would see all this footage of him with his Mosrite, splay leg, leather jacket, kind of Stooges haircut. That was my most influential Marshall user because I was a punk guitar player. And he was able to get that chainsaw guitar through using all those Marshalls driven full.
I think Nevermind the Bollocks was more of a early heavy metal album than punk, to be honest.
The minute you saw Steve Jones on the TV, I thought, oh, I see, right, you don't have to be Richie Blackmore then. It is possible to write 3 chords and get yourself up on stage.
Here we go!
Diamond Head were one of the first wave of British heavy metal.
Punk and heavy metal were remarkably connected. What happened around about 1978 was it all started to coalesce. The media started to pick up on, hang on, the most exciting young bands in the country, be they from Sheffield, Newcastle, London, Birmingham, Manchester or Glasgow, happened to all fit into this funny little thing called hard or heavy rock. And the term the new wave of British heavy metal, which people just trip off the tongue now, sounds so ridiculous, but it summed it up because it was a young feeling in the country for metal.
The Marshall amp was now the must-have kit for the rock band. Kit began to change hands, and the scruffier it was, the better the band's image.
But the fact is that Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, Saxon, just to use 3 examples, would look about what do our heroes play? Oh, they use Marshalls, which were identifiable and instantly recognisable and gave the sound and the warmth that they wanted. So they started to use Marshalls because it was the obvious amp to use. Nothing else came close.
It just was a natural progression where we came out with all the energy, going hammer and tongues, you know, arms flailing, riffing. I can still remember this kid at front shouting, "It's great, it's just like punk, I love it!"
AC/DC became the epitome of a rock band. Driving rhythm, charismatic frontman, guitar maestro, and a backdrop of Marshalls.
You know, the bands that adopted the big stacks, you know, Cheap Trick, AC/DC, those bands that you know, produced this incredibly loud, sinewy sound, you know, and then later Def Leppard. There was nothing to add and nothing to take away. It was just perfect, and it still is. There's nothing that you need to do to it.
Marshall had hit the big time. Now dominating the UK, the export business began to take off. But powering rock perfection was not enough to protect Marshall from the next challenge. Disco was a threat to all live music, and that included the market for amps.
Even though in those days disco records were still being made in the studio by musicians, it wasn't about the big live performance, and therefore they didn't require the huge amps that in the days before PA systems seriously got sorted out were necessary to fill the bigger and bigger rooms.
All rock bands recorded albums because they wanted to tour. They wanted to be seen, and that's when the expression comes across. And disco undermined it, or tried to undermine it, by making records more important, but much more transient as well.
But a new wave of music suddenly swept into fashion. The electronic sound was taking over the charts, and overnight, the synthesizer quickly became the must-have piece of kit for new bands. At the same time, other amplifier brands were becoming serious competition. Marshall was becoming outflanked on all sides.
They were starting to get cheeky little oiks on their home turf like Orange, Sound City and Hiwatt. And you know, they were building Marshall-style amplifiers. Some of them were undercutting Marshall in terms of price. Some of them, like Orange and Hiwatt, had quite distinctive sounds of their own. so they weren't just precisely copying.
People used to say to me, well, Marshall is very good once you can afford it.
Marshall was in trouble and sales plummeted.
In 1981, we were down to 17 people on the clock.
In the next episode, Marshall fights back.